Okay, well, this is part of our journey for looking at what contributes to a great image design. And we said with photography, the three major components are the timing, that decisive moment, and also the narrative of the image and the aesthetics. And we're going to look today at visual weight and balance and how they contribute to both the aesthetics of the image, but particularly to the narrative of the image and the visual path that the viewer takes through the image. So when we talk about the balance within an image, it's our ability to compose what's within the frame to give a visual path through the image. And the visual path is determined by what attracts the viewer to dive into the image and where they start that path and how they follow that path. And the different objects within the image will determine where the viewer's eye goes and how long it stays within the image. And what we always aim to do is keep the viewer in the image and not allow them to stray outside. And that's why I often remind you not to leave things right in the edge of frame, because it will take the viewer's eye outside. So we're surrounded by balance and harmony just in nature, and we feel peaceful and we enjoy something when it's harmonious and balanced. When things are discordant, we are distressed. And sometimes photographers and artists will create images that will cause us to be distressed. But most of the time, if we're going to enjoy an image, we like it to give us peace and harmony. And that's what balance does within an image, is enables the viewer to be comfortable to keep revisiting this image. So when we're framing something up, we need to be quite aware whether it's balanced or imbalanced. And this is a shot of, I just took to street photography. I thought this young girl looked amazing with her colours and the dog, and it just really struck my eye. So the first image I took was one of those ones where you just click because you think you haven't got time to catch it. And it's imbalanced. You can see as soon as we have a human or an animal too close to the edge of frame and looking out of frame at that closeness, it makes us feel uncomfortable. And that big dark blob at the top of her head takes our eye up there and then out of the frame. So yes, I captured it, but is it a good image? No. So I then had a chance to reframe because she looked up and the dog looked up and it sat back closer to her, and I shot it again. And you can see the one on the right looks right. We feel by gut instinct when something's right because it is balanced. They've both got room to look out the frame. It's that white space sort of gives both subjects breathing room, and it's not heavy. It's just nicely balanced. So visual weight is, if you think about it, it's a bit like a beam balance. And your images, if you pin them on the wall, should stay there. They should be balanced from a visual weight perspective. And visual weight is not necessarily the same, based on the size of the object. It can be just, there's a lot of elements, and we're going to have a look at them, that give something visual weight. But where we have them placed within the image is a bit like putting them on a beam balance. And if we put the subject right slap bang in the middle, it will give us balance, because that's what happens in a beam balance. And we're going to have a look at symmetry. And we're also going to look at asymmetry, where the things on either side of this seesaw aren't equal in looks or size, but they have a different visual weight. And just like when you're on a seesaw with a small child, you need to know where to place yourself on that beam balance. And just like that beam balance, if we place things close to the edge, then they have more visual weight, just like we do on a seesaw. And if we place them sort of in, like on the intersection of the rule of thirds, they have more visual weight than they do if they're placed in the middle. So it's an interesting concept to have to think about in your mind about visual weight in an image and balancing your subject against other elements within the image and their relative visual weight. So I mentioned symmetrical balance, which is the easiest to attain, and we're surrounded by symmetry, particularly in nature. And if something is obviously symmetrical, it makes a great image to really explore that symmetry and get it exactly in the middle. And often when you show me your images, I say, look, it's great and the idea was great, but you needed to have it slap bang in the middle and equal either side. You can't just chop off one side if it is symmetrical. So explore symmetry. If you see symmetry, then try and explore it. And explore it, you can see this isn't exactly square on, but there's enough symmetry in either side to balance it. Try and, I often say to you, please don't put your subject slap bang in the middle of the photo because it looks amateurish. So try and avoid that amateurish look and tend to use it when something is symmetrical. Like the human face is symmetrical, and a portrait with a person right in the middle, showing the symmetry of their face, is very interesting. It also works well in a square format. So if you are exploring symmetry in something, try cropping it. Crop it in camera first to make sure that you've got that perfect symmetry, and then when you get into post, crop it as a square. So we can have symmetry left and right hand side. We can also have symmetry in top and bottom. So if you have an opportunity to do things like reflections, or if something has a very strong horizontal component, think about the visual weight of the top and bottom and giving it some symmetry. We can also have symmetry in our diagonals, where we have a diagonal section and either side of that has symmetry. And so explore that option as well. So when you're framing something up, we've talked about how placing it on the diagonal gives it a lot of visual weight because it gives it energy. And by putting that visual weight equally on either side of the image, it gives it balance. We can also use that symmetry when we have quite simple subjects and we don't want to have distractions. It allows the viewer to calmly look at the image and look at either side, and even that has a narrative in it, and it just takes away distractions. We often use symmetry for balance when we're photographing man-made objects and buildings. And, I'd really encourage you when you are photographing man-made objects and buildings to try at least one symmetrical image and then mix it up with other things. But it usually does give it a harmonious look if it is balanced within the frame. But it doesn't have to be man-made objects. We can also just balance subjects and put them either side, and the chairs, the table, everything in here is balanced. The two dark spots in the side, the escalators, we've put something right in the middle in terms of something to rest the viewer's eye on, and the escalators, but either side of that is perfectly symmetrical and was lined up to be that, to give the viewer a confidence to walk around that and have an expectation of where they are meant to travel. Whilst I've said that, symmetry can often give us a really interesting and harmonious image, most of the things that we fit within our frame when we're shooting are asymmetrical. The world, by the time we fit it within a wide angle lens, is not symmetrical. So it's a much more common approach when we're actually taking a photograph. But we have to think of the same concept of balance. And so I've recommended, if you are taking something that has lots of elements within it, don't place your subject right slap bang in the middle. It is really, it's a simplistic approach and it doesn't often work. So we tend to place the subject off center, but if we place the subject off center, just like we had with the seesaw, we have to balance the rest of the image with complementary objects, and we have to think about their visual weight. So the other things within the image enable us to have a visual path through the image, that we look at the subject, which usually has the heaviest visual weight, and then we go around the rest of the objects within the image and come back to the subject, go around again. And we have to be conscious of those other subjects within the image, that they don't overtake the subject. And I've often said to you, why did you take this image? And you say, oh, I just loved that flower. Well, the flower was great, but the guy on the right-hand side in the bright red t-shirt is just overpowering it. It's got too much visual weight. We need to be cognizant of what our subject is, make sure it's got the heaviest visual weight, and we're going to have a look at how do we know, and then ensure that the things around it add to the narrative, provide a visual path, but don't take away from the viewer's knowledge of what you want them to look at in this photograph. So anything within the image that has great visual weight will grab our attention, and we're going to have a look at the elements that contribute to that. And anything with very little visual weight will just recede into the background. So with this image here, the visual weight is the cow and the grass. I mean, whoa, we just dive straight into that. But you can see that it's balanced. That tree, that white tree coming out of the right-hand side at the top, is balancing the cow. So you can get visual balance through a number of elements. And those elements can be the size of the object, the color of the object, the cow being that bright reddy yellow, immediately our dives into there. The grass had quite a visual weight because of that saturation and vibrance of the grass. The tone and contrast of that tree, the light tree against the dark background, gave it visual weight. The position, the fact it was up the top of the frame, gave it more visual weight, and the size of it. And the fact that everything, the tree and the cow, were in focus, gave them visual weight. So we're just going to have a look at each of those primary elements and what makes it heavier or what makes it lighter. And these are the things when you're framing up and you think, oh, it just doesn't look right. What do I need in there to balance it up? And it may just be a person walking through the background. It may be just something to balance up the other side, like that tree coming out. And it may just mean you changing your point of view or your position, or zooming in or zooming out. So larger objects have more visual weight than smaller objects. We need to look at the color of the objects, and I've always said to be very wary of red and yellow if it's not the subject, because they do have great visual weight, and particularly if they're highly saturated. So colors that are highly saturated have a lot more visual weight than pale colors. Have a look at the tone and contrast, so that I've often said to you with your images, be aware the lightest thing in the image or the darkest thing in the image will have attract the viewer's attention. They have great visual weight. So each of the objects within your image, how they compare to the background in terms of their tone and contrast, will add or subtract from their visual weight. The actual position within the image, anything at the top has more visual weight than something down the bottom. Anything close to frame, and that's a bit like the beam balance or the seesaw. If it's close to the edge, has a lot of visual balance because it puts a lot of tension in the image. If things are in the front, then they have more visual weight than something way in the background. If something is textured versus smooth, it has more visual weight. Regular shapes and objects, and we've explored this when we were talking about composition, to try and incorporate shapes into your images because they have great visual weight and they attract the viewer's attention. They're a lot more attractive than an amorphous sort of blob in the background. And also the orientation, and we looked at before how if we put something on a diagonal, it has more visual weight than if something is horizontal. So when you're framing up and you review your image in the back of your screen and you go, yeah, it's okay, but think about all these different things of what you can add or subtract from your image to make it better. And it may be that something is competing with it rather than complementing it. And that may mean that you need to zoom in more or just shift the position that you're taking the image from and improve it while you're shooting it. I love Mondrian's work, and I could never work out how he worked out how to put the colours and the shapes in those positions, because it just works. And when you investigate this from looking at the elements that I just talked about of tone, whether things are dark or they're light, whether they're red, yellow or blue, and red has so much more visual weight than something that's completely desaturated. It's much more visual weight than the blue or the grey. So Mondrian was the master of this, and the size of each one of these elements, it just works. So that's what we're trying to do in your images, is when you're framing up, is to think about the visual weight of the other things that aren't the subject. We also have some secondary design elements that we need to think about. And one of them is density of subjects, so that if you have a number of things all packed together, then remember when we looked at Gestalt theory, he saw that as being a group, and it had more visual weight once there was a number of objects together. And the same with patterns. Heavy patterns have more visual weight than simple patterns. And in interior design, we have to be very aware of that. We can't have a lot of very complicated patterns competing against each other, because they compete rather than complement. Negative space will impact the visual weight of the subject. If the subject is a small part of a lot of negative space, then it makes the subject heavier, per se. Something has more visual weight if we have a personal connection or a human connection to it. So the cow had quite a visual weight because of our intrinsic interest in animals. We dive into some living animal within that. If it had been a rock, it wouldn't have had as much intrinsic interest. If you're looking at images and you like dogs better than cats, then a dog will have a heavier visual weight for you as the viewer. A cat lover, the cat would have had a heavier visual interest. The sharpness of the image, and I often say to you, make sure that the subject of your image is sharp. If it's sharp, it has greater visual weight than something that's blurry. And we use that as a way to get the viewer to land on our subject and then take the walk around it. Saturation, relative saturation of objects within an image will impact their perception of visual weight. And also things that we know to be heavy will have more visual weight. So a house has more visual weight than a hot air balloon. So just things that we intrinsically, by gut feel, know are heavy, we tend to give them more emphasis in terms of visual weight. So I've just gone through those there of focus subjects versus blurry subjects. If we've got something sharp and focused, it's got more visual weight than blurry, fuzzy subjects. So just take note of those tables and keep them in your mind, so that when you are trying to balance an image while you're shooting it, or while you're editing or cropping it, you know what to take out or put back in. So our gut usually tells us when something's balanced. When we're putting furniture around a room, we don't all pile it into one corner. We try and make the room look balanced. When we're arranging flowers, we try and make them look balanced. When we're doing anything that requires creativity, we try and balance the image. But why do we need to know about visual weight if we can do it by gut feel? It's when it's wrong, when we just know it's wrong. We look at it and we go, there's something wrong with it, I'm not quite sure what it is. That's when you need to know what to change. What you, when you're shooting it, what to change your position, your point of view, your crop, the lens, the zoom, to add or remove objects from that image. That's when you need to know the visual weight. And also when you're selecting your best images, when you're going through what you've taken last week and you want to show me what are your best images, you need to know why they work. Why does this one work as compared to that one? And your gut feel will usually tell you which one's the best, but I want you to analyze why. And when you're editing your images, and I say to you, just need to crop that right-hand side, just about an inch off that right-hand side, it's because it's not balanced. That right-hand side is overweighing the subject. And that's when you need to think about visual weight, when you're actually taking your images, when you're editing your images, and when you're selecting your images. Because images that are balanced and the visual path provides the narrative that you're trying to communicate, that's when we know it works. So whenever you're looking at images, just look at the parts of them that contribute to the visual weight. And you can see on the one down the bottom here, the red in the sign really contributes to the visual weight. The regular circles have a lot of visual weight. So why does the image work? Why did we frame it like this in the first place? And it's because the human down the bottom has a lot of visual weight. We immediately, once we go to the two red signs, we'll dive in to see her. And that's why we need to balance the top of that with that large regular circle. And the image on the right, we can see that we've used tone to provide a path through the image, tone and color and saturation. So for each of the images that you take, you need to consciously think about, why did I take them? What was the visual path I wanted the viewer to go through? And then you compose them and crop them accordingly. So the images that you really like, you need to go back and just have a look at them. What was it about them that in terms of balance and visual weight that made that image work? And, you know, sometimes if we're really struggling with an image in the editing, think about what would make it work better. And the two images down the bottom with the diptych, each one of those images I liked, But by putting them together, they actually balance each other. So again, when you're looking at diptychs or triptychs, each of them should balance the other images within that set of images. So for this week's homework, I want you to go through your recent photos and assess why you like them and what provided the balance within those images. When you're framing up at the next workshop that we do, I want you to consciously think, what else do I need in this image to balance it, or what do I need to take it out that would enable us to balance it? And when you are selecting images to show me, thinking about how they work. And keep those two tables of the primary and secondary elements. I'll send them through to you as pages. Keep them in the back of your mind of what provides visual weight and what hasn't got visual weight. And that will then inform both your shooting and your editing. So until next time, I want you to think about balance. Thanks.